information that could help are getting better or worse is at best incomplete. In many programs and departments, it seems that too often people run into barriers when accessing programs and services that they are entitled to. Let me turn first to our audit of systemic barriers in correctional services. We wanted to know whether Correctional Service Canada delivered interventions that reflect the ever-growing diversity of the offender population. This included whether corrections staff had the cultural awareness and sensitivity to deliver programs that meet the diverse needs of offenders. While we set out to look at whether the department was meeting the needs of its offender population, what we found were outcomes showing that certain groups of offenders were disadvantaged by systemic barriers that affect their timely access to parole. In particular, we found that Indigenous and Black offenders and women experienced poorer outcomes than other groups in the correctional system. They also faced greater barriers to a safe and gradual reintegration into society.
A systemic barrier results from seemingly neutral policies, procedures, or practices that disadvantage one or more groups. We found not only systemic barriers, but also, in my view, systemic racism in certain instances where those seemingly neutral policies, procedures, or practices have persisted and have resulted in disproportionately different treatment of some groups of racialized offenders. Correctional Service Canada has failed to identify and eliminate the systemic barriers that persistently disadvantaged Indigenous and Black offenders in custody. We raised similar issues in our audits in 2015, 16, and 17, yet the department has done little to change the policies, practices, tools, and approaches that produce these differing outcomes. We found that barriers were present from the moment offenders entered federal institutions. For example, Indigenous and Black offenders were assigned to maximum security institutions by staff at twice the rate of other groups of offenders. They also remained in custody longer and at higher levels of security before their release. Nous avons aussi constaté.
We also found that timely access to correctional programs designed to prepare offenders for release and support their successful reintegration into the community had continued to decline since our 3 past audits. By December 2021, with the additional impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, only 6% of men offenders had accessed the programs they needed before they were first eligible to apply for parole. Different outcomes for certain groups of racialized and Indigenous offenders have persisted for too long.
Identify and remove systemic barriers to eliminate systemic racism in corrections, including meeting its own commitment to better reflect the diversity of the offender population in its workforce. The department needs to address representation gaps, namely Indigenous representation across all institutions, gender representation in women's institutions, and representation at institutions with a higher number of Black offenders. Next, I will turn to our audit of hard-to-reach populations. We wanted to know whether the federal government ensured that individuals in low-income groups could access the Canada Child Benefit, the Canada Workers Benefit, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, and the Canada Learning Bond. L'Agence du Revenu du Canada.
The Canada Revenue Agency and Employment and Social Development Canada know that not everyone who could receive these benefits is getting them. These individuals who may be unaware of benefits available to them include low-income groups who are not easily served through regular channels, Indigenous persons, seniors, newcomers to Canada, and persons who have disabilities. These hard-to-reach populations often face one or more barriers to access benefits, and as such, they require more help from government. The Canada Revenue Agency and Employment and Social Development Canada lacked a clear and complete picture of the people who are not accessing benefits. The agency and the department also did not know whether most of their targeted outreach activities had helped to increase the benefit take-up rates for hard-to-reach populations.
We also found that the agency and the department overstated the rates of people accessing benefits because they did not always account for people who had not filed income tax returns, a requirement to access most benefits. Though the agency and the department have taken some action, they still lack a comprehensive plan to connect people with benefits. As a result, they are failing to improve the lives of some individuals and families who may need these benefits the most. Our third audit focused on the processing of disability benefit claims for veterans and the Canadian Armed Forces, from the Canadian Armed Forces and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Overall, we found that veterans waited almost 10 months for a decision when first applying for benefits. Processing timelines were longer for francophones, women, and RCMP veterans. Nous avons également constaté
We also found that the department's data on how it processes benefits applications and the organization of this data were poor. Because of this, Veterans Affairs Canada was unable to determine whether its initiatives to improve the treatment of claims have sped up the process or made it worse. We noted that both the funding and almost half of the employees on the team responsible for processing applications were temporary. The department also lacked a long-term staffing plan. The combined impact of these shortcomings means that veterans are waiting too long to receive benefits. They experience unacceptable delays that can significantly impact their well-being and their families. Our last report today is a follow-up on our 2015 audit on the use of Gender-Based Analysis Plus in government, or GBA Plus. This is an analysis tool to help reduce existing and potential inequalities based on gender and other intersecting identity factors. Overall, our audit showed that the government does not know whether its actions are achieving better gender equality outcomes for diverse groups of people. In many cases, the analysis had been completed, but we did not see a concrete impact on outcomes.
We found that long-standing challenges that we previously identified continue to hinder the full implementation of GBA Plus across government. Although the lead organizations have addressed some of our recommendations from 2015, many others date back to our first audit of GBA in 2009. Some of the challenges include gaps in the capacity to perform a gender-based analysis and the lack of data available on demographic factors. In addition, we found that the government doesn't know if GBA Plus is achieving its goals because its impacts have not been measured and reported on in a consistent and structured manner. The Privy Council Office, the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, and Women and Gender Equality Canada need to better collaborate and ensure that all departments and agencies fully integrate GBA Plus in a way that produces real results for all Canadians. To sum it up, these audits point to long-standing problems and barriers across a broad range of government activity. These barriers are unacceptable, whether faced by Indigenous and Black offenders or by low-income individuals and veterans accessing benefits. As to the barriers that GBA Plus is meant to break down, while there is a greater dialogue and awareness today of gender and identity factors, actions have yet to catch up with words. Le gouvernement fédéral.
The federal government must do better. All of Canada's people, no matter their gender, race, ability, or geographical location, deserve better. Much better. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We would be pleased to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Because we're losing a little bit of time at the end, I'm going to be quite vigilant on times today, which means be aware that the auditor and her team need to be given time to respond. So I want to get through 5 rounds to ensure we all have time. So if you are cut off, you'll have to use later time to get an answer you seek. So on that, if I could turn to MP Duncan, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everybody there in person. Ms. Hogan, thank you for your work, for you and your team. I've always said that I value the work that you do and the work of the Auditor General's office, and especially now. And I think your comments have been blunt and frank, and I think resemble what a lot of Canadians are feeling when it comes to the details of these reports and the quality of work being done by the government in the past couple of years. I note yesterday that you had said, quote, "It's very frustrating and discouraging for the government to know for many years that problems exist, that barriers exist, but that little action is taken," unquote. And I think these reports are timely right now because I know as a member of Parliament with a constituency office, customer service levels and response times are absolutely collapsing, frankly, as we come out of the pandemic. There have been challenges accommodating and adjusting to the pandemic when it started. But as we come out and we get back to a semblance of normalcy and return to normalcy, I think of the services that we deal with in our office, CRA, Service Canada, IRCC, Veterans Affairs, Passport Canada, Nexus, the list goes on. We're seeing an absolute collapse and a total unpreparedness for trends and things that are going along. Some of the observations that I have just at a high level to your reports that I appreciate and how it backs up is spending money is not a result. And I think you allude to this in your conclusions in observations in several of your reports. Very often we call the government on for action of addressing, for an example, backlogs for processing claims for veterans. They say we're spending X number of millions of dollars to address this. And at the end of the day, the frank reality is we're spending more and now getting less. The value for money and the per capita, frankly, of this is not matching the rhetoric or the responses that we get. We're not seeing leadership, we're not seeing good management, and we're not seeing innovation that's really happening. It needs to be happening in what we're doing here. And I can foreshadow, frankly, Ms. Hogan, without prejudicing your future work or decisions on what to study. Look for an example of Nexus cards. It's been in the news recently. Our office is dealing with this. No plans, no timelines, 300,000 application backlog, and absolute chaos 3 years into the pandemic, let alone adjusting to that type of program during the pandemic. As we return to normal, there's still literally no leadership or plan or anything. I want to focus my first round, perhaps if I could, on your report on Veterans Affairs and processing disability claims for veterans. I want to quote here, I believe that from this report, you mentioned in your press conference and in there that, quote, "You were left with the conclusion that the government has failed to meet a promise it made to our veterans, that it would take care of them if they were injured in service." That's a pretty bold statement, rightfully an accurate statement, but an important statement to understand the context of this. One of the things that was very frustrating was not only the details of the report confirming what we're hearing from veterans and from constituents across the country, but was a response from the Minister and the Department of Veterans Affairs. There was a CBC News article report that said, quote, "The department said it accepted the criticism and recommendations, but also blamed delays on a 40% increase in the number of applications across the board and an increase in first-time applications. I believe it was a 75% increase in first-time applications. Here's what frustrates me, and I'd like to get your comments on this, is preparing and using data and trends. When it comes to Veterans Affairs and applications, the federal government should be able to look, for example, at another department, the Department of National Defense, to know the number of Canadians that are serving, that have injuries, their ages, the demographics to understand and be able to prepare and predict when surge in services are coming. Could you just speak to a little bit about this, about the department's ability? I want you to respond to that and perhaps speak to, are they doing anything and looking at future trends in terms of what service levels may be and volumes may be? Is there anything you saw in your work that would suggest they are planning ahead appropriately for this?
There was a lot there. Thank you. I will try to respond to that. I guess what I can tell you is that when we looked at their data, we did find that there were some issues with the quality of the data, and that there was a lot of activity to try and increase processing time and reduced wait times, but the department was unable to demonstrate and didn't know for themselves if certain steps or certain activities had actually reduced the wait time or slowed down the wait time. And so in the end, as you say, it's not about spending more money, but about spending it in a more intelligent way or a more creative way that actually targets the barriers. And to do that, you need the data to understand. I think all too often we see that there is a lack of willingness or desire to share data, sometimes within a department or even across a department. It's a growing theme that I'm actually seeing across many audits. We saw it during some of the COVID support programs, and we see it again here. There are long wait times to share that information or a willingness not to share the information. Now, if it comes to forward-looking trends and what they're doing to sort of tackle some of that problem, I don't know if Mr. Swales perhaps could add something a little more pointed to your question at the end.
And Mr. Swales, I'm going to have to cut you off there, but I hope we will come back and get that answer from you. So turning now to Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please. Thank you.
I too would like to echo the words of my colleague, Mr. Duncan, in acknowledging and thanking the Auditor General and her team for your work and for the bluntness of the work that you do, because we need to hear it full front and center if we're going to get the work done that we need to do. And I'm looking forward, and I know that my colleagues on this side, we're looking forward to studying each of the reports that you have brought forward in greater detail with the departments involved, because yes, there are problems, and yes, we need to find out how can we help, certainly on the as members of the Public Accounts Committee, how can we help public servants do better? Auditor General Hogan, I'd like to ask you, and I'm just reflecting, members here know that I served in this committee 2015, 2018, where the previous Auditor General would bring forth themes, underlying themes, overarching themes, such as repeated gaps in Indigenous services and gaps in data collection. So I'd like to hear from you, because I think we see a theme emerging here, if not two or three. I'd like to hear from you what you see are the overarching themes in the work that you have done.
So that's an excellent question. Thank you. I think when I look at this group of audit reports that we put together here, I would tell you that it's about individuals that are often forgotten, whether it be disabled veterans or incarcerated individuals or those who are target of gender or other inequities. And it's about the government always trying to apply the same recipe to every single individual. We're seeing that many programs are reaching a good portion of the people they're intended to reach, and now it's about trying to reach those hard-to-reach individuals on the edge. And how can you change that recipe? I think that you can change that with a good, solid GBA plus analysis backed by some data. It's not about only a new program, but perhaps applying it to existing programs to see what inequities exist there that you're not aware of. But you need to gather information and do that analysis. And so I think the theme that previous Auditor Generals raised about having data, having a good data strategy and knowing what you have, but then using it in a meaningful way. So I think this group of reports goes really well together and sort of bundles that theme of figuring out how to identify a barrier that a group is facing and then using your information to target how to eliminate it and make the outcomes better. Let's not focus on process, but focus on the progress of programs.
Thank you for that, because I think I too, and I know there are members of our caucus who are extremely frustrated with, I believe it's report number 4, the systemic barriers in the correctional services. That is something that has the systemic racism that you have identified in your report. And so when you talk about GBA Plus, I mean, this has been an ongoing theme or approach that has been recommended, I think you mentioned, since 2009. I remember a key report also in 2015, 2016. Are we getting there with the GBA Plus? Are you seeing, because I think some departments do better than others. It is an evolving tool. Are you seeing those tools being developed and being shared across ministries and departments?
I think the honest answer would be it's a bit of a mixed bag. I am pleased to see an increased dialogue and awareness, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, about gender and other identity factors. And dialogue is a great place to start, but it's just the first step. We do see some departments or some programs that use the GBA Plus analysis in a really useful way and actually modified their delivery. There are other instances where it is almost seen as a requirement. I need to do it in order to get past a certain hurdle. Often we see data gathered and then the data not used, or the data not gathered. It really is a bit of a hodgepodge, I guess. I don't know a better word to really describe it. And so it's about being a little bit more consistent. So then when you have a lead organization like Wage and Gender Equality that has to summarize how this tool is materializing into concrete outcomes, but they don't have the information or the consistent reporting, they can't then demonstrate the actual outcomes that the tool is producing. So again, it comes back to good reporting and good data to tell people that activity is resulting in an outcome.
Okay, understood. And just one last question, if I
30
have time,
seconds.
Chair. What is the Auditor General's office? What is your role in interacting with departments when you identify gaps?
Well, most of the really important recommendations will show up in our audit reports, but we don't shy away from providing more informal comments to departments and agencies to help them improve. And we've made a commitment within our office to focus in on the use of GBA Plus as a tool, as well as the SDGs. We've ramped up our own expertise and knowledge in that area, and we're going to try and mainstream it through most of our audits to see how equity and diversity and inclusion are factored in by the government on a day-to-day basis. And we hope our mainstreaming will drive some change.
Et merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We will go now to Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here. In particular, thank you for your opening remarks because, as my colleagues have said, were extremely clear and frank. You seem to be increasingly frustrated. This is particularly important because it reflects what a lot of people are thinking in Quebec and in the committee as well. We've seen a lack of follow-up in many cases by the government, and even a seeming lack of interest. there seems to be a lack of desire or will to really improve. Your work, of course, is fundamental to our democracy. As you have mentioned, you have really put your finger on something that is very important to us in the committee. We need to have a government that takes care of the people who are most vulnerable. And you have shown that there are grave shortcomings on the part of the government in this area. You have already started to talk about this a bit, but I want to focus on our veterans and the difficulties in accessing disability claims. Mr. Desilets, my colleague at the Veterans Affairs Committee, had talked about the difficulties, especially for Francophone veterans who face longer wait times. Can you talk about that issue and the gaps? Yes. In our audit on disability benefit claims, we saw that the department lacked the capacity to really process applications, and the average was 39 weeks for people to get a decision. But when we looked at the data in greater detail, certain groups were even more disadvantaged, and those were Francophones and women and RCMP veterans. So your question addressed Francophones, so I will talk about that issue in particular. There was a report in 2018 from the Veterans Ombudsman that showed that there were greater barriers for Francophone veterans, and an office was created in Montreal after that to process Francophone requests and applications. There was a bilingual team, but because the demand was so high, that group did not have the capacity to really deal with all those applications, and it took an average of 46 weeks for Francophones to get their decision. In the Library of Parliament information, it says that it took 76 weeks compared with 22 weeks for Anglophones. I can understand that there may be a higher volume of applications, but if there are more Francophones that are in the armed forces and that are leaving, then, of course, we need to provide proportionally more service. And that raises the point that it is surprising, after all, that Francophones should be considered a vulnerable group here. There's no reason that one of our founding peoples of Canada should have to wait longer to get a service. It's the case in that department, and it's the case in almost every aspect of government. You've talked about people who are vulnerable for other reasons, systemic racism, and you talked about offenders and so on. It's really important to point this out. So I would like to hear what you have to say about systemic racism as well. Your question is about systemic racism in the correctional services? And even through other reports where you have seen this. In the correctional services, what we saw was that some offenders had different outcomes because of those factors. For example, Indigenous offenders faced barriers at almost every step. As soon as they arrived had a federal institution, including the security rating, whether they ended up in a maximum, medium, or minimum security institution. And they were twice as likely to end up in a maximum security institution. For women, it was 3 times higher. And this had an outcome, of course. 53% of Canadian or of Indigenous women were placed in a higher security institution, and that meant that they spent longer in the institutions. So there was a disproportional impact based on race. Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, for 6 minutes.
And I want to thank the witnesses for being present with us today. You know, what we see here is 4 very damning reports that I think our ministries and the government have known about. You've said that in your opening statement. They've known about these issues persisting. And what I have to say in many ways is the fact that the people who are experiencing this discrimination have known about it for far longer. People with disabilities, the Indigenous community members have been saying this for decades and decades and decades. This level of systemic discrimination is overt, it's dangerous, and it's killing people. You know, I know this, people in my community in Edmonton-Griesba, and I'm sure in every single constituency here, we have people in our communities, every single one of us, who are being impacted by the systemic problems that continue to plague our public service. It's literally killing people. I want to thank the Auditor General for outlining what I think is a terrible process and a lack of accountability in our systems. The fact that you've had to table these multiple times, I can feel your level of frustration, and I understand that level of frustration deeply from my own experiences of interacting with these systems. You know, we can even just look around this room and we know that a GBA plus analysis is probably warranted, you know, in every single ministry. And understanding what that looks like and ways to actually improve it are things that I'm concerned about. You know, the fact that this persists, these issues persist and they continue to persist, is eroding our trust in these public institutions. I'm concerned with how we regain that trust with the community members that are cited in these reports, you know, in particular Indigenous, Black community members, persons with disabilities. We know, not just before these reports, but from their own experiences, that these issues persist. And so, you know, when I looked at some of these reports, I couldn't help but to feel like we've more than failed these populations. Our government has. Subsequent governments since as early as 2009. And it breaks my heart to think that we could have done so much more in those times. These recommendations could have helped people in those times. From 2009 to today, that's a long period of time. And so we're talking about people's lives at the end of the day here and how we can actually make them better. And so I'm concerned with the fact that oftentimes, especially in my short, limited time in this place, I've already found that there's an incredible amount of information, but there is so little action that it just makes me incredibly frustrated. So I can only sympathize with you, Ms. Hogan, to understand that your role in this is incredibly difficult, knowing that you'll be coming to this committee many times before in the last 3 years, and you'll likely face what is the same answer, which is we hear you and we're going to shelve this report and we're going to look at it real good and it's going to be awesome and we can't wait for your next one. That's 99% likely what's going to happen here. But that's not what should happen here. That's the problem. And I challenge my colleagues in the government to really take seriously what this report means, these reports really, really mean. You know, I'm going to work with you folks to make these things better. We're all standing ready to work with you to make this better, but why aren't they getting better? You know, and that's my question to you, Ms. Hogan. How can we actually enforce some of this? Because Canadians don't deserve this. You know, people with disabilities shouldn't have to go through extraordinary hoops and hurdles to get the basic services they're entitled to. Indigenous people should not be incarcerated at the rate they are by folks who have obviously learned the language of GBA+, but are not acting on that information. how do we actually enforce change in these institutions, because it's near criminal?
I wish I had a good answer to tell you how to resolve this. If I look at some of the reports or some of the work that we've done in the last 2 years, when there's a focus on the actual outcome of an individual, and we saw that very often during COVID relief programs, we see the concrete impact that it has on Canadians in a direct way. What I find all too often happens, and these reports are examples of that, is that there's a lot of focus on the machinery, on the process, instead of the outcome. So it's almost like too much attention is put to all the steps to get somewhere, and we forget about where we were going. And so I think if that attention that we saw, the shift that we saw during the pandemic to really focus in on outcomes, is applied with a GBA plus lens, and a real desire to understand that the way we did perhaps shouldn't be the way we should continue to do, would hopefully drive some meaningful change. But I'm not the only one who can help drive that change. All of Parliament plays a role in that, in continuing to apply pressure to government to take action, to be able to demonstrate that their actions actually result in outcomes, and all of Canadians can. Because I agree with your statements. I expect better from the government, and I believe all of Canadians expect to get better from its government.
Thank you. You've got 10 seconds for a statement, but if I see you waved back to me, so I'm going to
give it to you.
I'll put that in my pocket, so thank you. Turning now to our second round, Mr. Patzer, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of pick up on a theme that's developing here, right? I mean, that's, 4 reports here. I mean, this binder is just full of reports, right? And I mean, all of them say the same thing. You've got recommendations. Department responds. They say agreed, agreed, agreed. Nothing happens. We do a report on the report. More recommendations. Agreed, agreed, agreed. Nothing happens, right? So you kind of alluded to it, I think, with the last with Blake's round of questioning. But it's like, what more needs, like, how can we break the cycle, I guess, is kind of where this is at, right? I mean, you alluded to it, but maybe just elaborate and expand on that.
Well, I think you raise a little different angle, right? The federal government is excellent at creating an action plan, and it's the actual implementation of that action plan. But it's not just the step of the implementation of the action plan, but it's thinking a little bit further ahead to know, how will I be able to demonstrate that the actions that I took resulted in a concrete change for Canadians? So maybe they need to step back and understand, maybe I should take a little bit longer to prepare this action plan, that it shouldn't just be on the process or the tool or the item that was highlighted as having a weakness or being a barrier, but really on the intended outcome. So I go back to a statement I made earlier. Applying the same recipe, if we look at outreach to vulnerable populations, a good portion of the country are accessing the benefits that are available to them. But if you want to get that edge, it's about doing it a little differently. The same recipe, the same way isn't working. And that a GBA plus lens or a different angle to doing things is a way to change that recipe. So I really do think it's about changing how we've been functioning over time. So I would encourage you to challenge departments to not just always do the status quo going forward. And perhaps that will come up with a different outcome for Canadians.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. Yesterday, the Minister of Veteran Affairs claimed they had taken significant actions to reduce wait times and painted a picture very different than the one, though, that you've given us here today. So how do you respond to that, and do you believe that this is just another example of the government not taking an issue seriously enough, just kind of saying they're doing something, developing an action plan, but not actually really addressing the problem?
I believe they were talking about addressing a backlog and the action that they took to reduce the backlog of files But reducing the backlog isn't necessarily improving the wait time or reducing the wait time. There is a backlog. Our report highlights a little over 40,000 files in a backlog for different reasons. About 50,000 or so files in the last year were processed. That isn't measuring the outcome against not only your service standard, but the expectation of a veteran. There's a commitment to provide a decision within 16 weeks or approximately 4 months. Even though you've reduced the backlog, if the average wait time is still 39 weeks or 10 months, you haven't met that promise to the veterans. And the indicator that you have on your website to give them a sense of how long they should expect to wait isn't very useful for them if it's so far off. So it isn't just about addressing the backlog. I do consider it a success for every file that's closed and a veteran gets a decision, but it should also be about reducing how long it takes for them to have to wait for that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I've got veterans pre-pandemic that were waiting over 2 years sometimes to get a decision, to get what they're applying for, what they said they would be receiving. So dealing with that would be really good. For the Veterans Affairs staff for processing applications, you said half were temporary and that there was no long-term staffing plan. I think it'd be helpful for us to hear from you and your team in a little bit more detail about the findings and recommendations around that.
You have about 40 seconds.
Okay, so we found that, as you mentioned, about half of the staff that process these benefit claims are temporary. There is a repeat request for temporary funding and temporary staffing to address the backlog. But that isn't a long-term solution to actually reduce the outcome, which is the overall wait time. And that's why we recommended to Veterans Affairs Canada that they should put in place a long-term resourcing plan and ask for more stable, predictable funding. Temporary individuals turn over often. You spend a lot of time training them, and then just as you start to enjoy their productivity, they'll leave for a job that's more secure or permanent. And that's not a way to reduce the overall wait time, in our view.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I believe you just answered a lot of the questions that I was about to ask through Jeremy. I had the benefit of hearing your embargoed presentation on Monday. So we have 4 reports here, and they're unfortunately...
Excuse me, Ms. Bradford, would you just be able to remove your mask? It just helps for translation and just clarity on the floor.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, there's an overwhelming recurring theme on all 4 reports, even though they're on very different subject matters. You know, nothing changes, and the same things are identified and nothing changes. Can you just summarize for me the period of time when each of these reports were covered for the record?
Sure, absolutely, I can. The Systemic Barriers in Correctional Service Canada, the period that we audited covered January of 2020 all the way till June of 2021. At times we do in all of our reports, however, look for information before that, but all of our testing and sampling ended on June 2021. Processing disability benefits for veterans, the period that we actually targeted to look at files and statistics was from April 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. The access to benefits for hard-to-reach populations was from April 1st, 2019 till August 31st, 2021. And then our follow-up audit on Gender-Based Analysis Plus covered a period from April 2016 till the end of January 2022.
Okay, so thank you. So it is possible that there may have been some improvements made subsequent to when you made your report. There may have been, correct?
I would imagine it's possible. It's a question that you should ask the individual departments. But
Right.
I would hope that they started to act on our findings even while we were auditing. So I would like to think that there has been some improvement.
So what I wanted to know is, what is the procedure for follow-ups? Like, as I go through these reports and you see the recommendations and what they agreed to, and there's, you know, they'll give a date when they're going to accomplish a plan or whatever by a certain date. Do they automatically report back to you, or do you need to follow up, or, you know, are they diarized for follow-up by the OAG, or how does this follow-up process work?
That's a tentacled answer. There are many ways that the department would be subject to follow-up. So I'll start with our office, then I'll go to their departmental audit committee, and I'll actually speak about the Public Accounts Committee. So our office often will turn back and look at audits where we found that the results were so significant that they warranted us going back. It's an example today, you're looking at audits that were repeat subjects. We also recognize that we can't necessarily devote all of the resources to follow-ups if there are so many other aspects of government operations that we would like to audit. So we have launched a new product called the Results Measurement Follow-Up. It's an online product that's on our website. We are trying slowly but surely to add more departments and more results, but it is our intention to start following up just on specific measures or specific recommendations over time, and that would be one way for us to keep applying pressure. The departmental audit committees of all departments and agencies have a requirement by a Treasury Board standard to follow up on any recommendations that the department receives, whether they be from internal audits or external audits, including ours. So their departmental audit committee should be following up on the progress that management is making on their commitments and their action plans. And then the committee, the Public Accounts Committee, as well as the Environment Committee, has recently adopted the same motion that you have, that every entity that comes here is required to provide a detailed action plan in response to our recommendations. So the follow-up, perhaps, on those action plans in a regular basis might be another way to keep applying pressure to departments to demonstrate whether or not they're taking action. But I caution, as we're seeing in these reports, that taking action doesn't always translate into better positive outcomes for Canadians, and it's really that focus that some of the follow-ups should be on, is improved outcomes and not just whether or not processes were changed or modified.
Yes, I remember reading one of the reports that I think they only actually kind of measured 2 out of maybe 17, and with those 2, they couldn't really determine whether the processes in place had actually made a difference. So there generally seems to be an accountability issue that, things are identified and, it's a revolving wheel. I can appreciate your frustration.
And I'm afraid that is time for your round. We will now turn to Madame Sinclair Desgagnés. Vous avez encore 2 minutes 30.
You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the last point that you raised, Ms. Hogan, is particularly interesting, and that is about the follow-ups and how they work. I would like to hear some examples, perhaps the most outstanding examples, where you saw a lack of action when there was no action plan, or especially when there was no real action in outcomes. Well, I will limit myself to the reports we're discussing today, and I will give you the example of Veterans Affairs Canada. The results are unacceptable. The processing of disability claims for veterans, I would give that as an example, and certainly I could go into the past. During the pandemic, the government committed to take steps, but to prepare for a future pandemic, to change the health protection measures so that there would be better ways of preventing or dealing with a new pandemic. And in fact, we didn't see those measures in place for this pandemic. Then we have the issue of drinking water on reserves. There's been action, but also a lack of outcomes. We have this cycle of temporary action, but a lack of real progress often. I've been very frustrated over the past 2 years. I still have hope the government will change the way it approaches this, but I find it frustrating, especially because we're talking about real people.
Jalais, once again, you have the floor for 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to begin this round in reference to specific calls to action in the reports. One particular report related to the criminal justice system that are also found in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I think that another report that's in many ways similar in the sense that it provides very clear evidence as to the issues, and it provides very clear recommendations as to what's possible and what's needed from our government in order to remedy or accommodate some of the extreme overrepresentation of Indigenous and Black community members in our correctional system. I really do appreciate your office's attention to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's an important document in our nation's understanding of our systems, but also more so it's an opportunity, I think, to rebuild trust and to rebuild our relations with my relatives and Indigenous nations across the country. But of course, the risk is our failure as a country to actually do these things will continue to erode that process. You mentioned that you were working in some sense just in response to Ms. Shanahan's question related to ways to enforce some of this. You mentioned that at times you don't shy away in your informal recommendations or informal advice to departments and folks who are truly responsible for this ongoing crisis. And you mentioned that you've contacted several of them, but my question I guess is specific to CSC and the commissioner's own acceptance of the fact that this is continuing to happen. Have you talked to the commissioner or CSC at all to motivate or to demonstrate that these are simply unacceptable rates of continued violence against Indigenous people? It's unacceptable that they haven't applied a GBA plus analysis. It's unacceptable that they're continuing to disproportionately hire non-Indigenous, non-Black correctional officers in these facilities.
So I can assure you that the audit team over many, many, many months, while the period covered by the audit started in January of 2020, we've been having very many conversations with individuals at Correctional Services Canada. I myself had several conversations during this audit with the Commissioner as well. And I did share with her our concern over the findings. We've talked through the recommendations, and you highlighted exactly an item coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation and many of the recommendations that came out of that report. One of those was actually a change to the Corrections Act that required that Indigenous social history be considered when looking at the security classification of an Indigenous offender. And we actually targeted in on a certain group of files where Indigenous offenders had their security classification increased after the initial rating done by the tool. And what we found was that the Indigenous social history there was no evidence of it being considered in that security classification. And we did not see whether or not other alternative restorative options like healing lodges or more time with elders had been considered as a way to reduce the risk of that for that offender. And so we do have a recommendation linked to that, so that it's a requirement in an act, not only because of that, but because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you.
That we include
very
that
much.
recommendation.
Mr. Desjardins, you more than earned your 12 seconds back. So, turning now to our third round, turning now to Mr. Duncan, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Hogan, I appreciate your echo in my first round of questions about the context of spending more and getting less, the value for money and the premise of that. So that's much appreciated. And I share the frustration, and we see this constantly through these reports of not sharing data trends and data information. And I think particularly it hits home for the processing disability benefits for veterans reports, again, of a culture and mindset of where Department of National Defense and Veterans Affairs Canada aren't sharing information on, those that are enlisting or those that have injuries, age and demographics to understand these future trends. This uptick in demand and applications should not be a surprise at all. The data should be there to know, again, staffing levels, all these information, the number of veterans, when they're leaving, all this type of thing. And it's just completely ignored. And as you alluded to, there's a hesitancy to share information. And frankly, it's almost a culture of a lack of respect or a compassion between the two departments that I find this is not shared. I want to go specifically in my time here to on report number 2 on veterans' disability claims. There was a part that was really disturbing to me, and I'll be a bit blunt in my question of asking, but section 2.35, we also found that Veterans Affairs Canada did not always calculate its performance against its standard consistently and accurately. And it goes on to say what they used for the end date, the department gave the end date that was used for the benefits decision being made. But in cases they don't talk about the assessment step, and other steps that go afterwards of the actual end date for the veteran, to your point, being successfully concluded and having their case done. I'm going to ask you a blunt question, if I could, Ms. Hogan. Do you believe that's data manipulation? And do you believe that's unethical on the department's report to use, quote, an end date when they know very well that's not the actual end date of the veteran getting the service?
So I think I'll address your first comment first, and then I will get to your question. One item I think I want to highlight about the lack or hesitancy of willingness to share information. Oftentimes in these reports and in other previous reports, we often hear also privacy concerns as a reason for why information isn't shared. So I can appreciate that it's complex, but I think as a Canadian, if you sit back, you believe that you're interacting with your government. And so you would hope that there would be a way for the government to perhaps solve some of those issues. When it comes to the end date, I do not believe that it was intentional manipulation of a date to deceive individuals. I believe that it was more of a focus on process. The start date doesn't start until all the information is gathered. So a veteran may have submitted their application, and there may be weeks that go with a back and forth between the department and the veteran to make sure that the file is complete. Then you have to wait a little bit for some medical information. Then the clock starts ticking. But for a veteran, that application has already been in the queue in their minds for quite some time. The same then happens at the end as you wait for the payment of the funds or the confirmation of the type of injury that was being classified. So I think it's about giving a veteran a realistic picture of how long they're actually going to wait instead of a service standard that hasn't been met in 7 years. So I think it's about being more transparent, perhaps, about all the steps in the process that would help a veteran better understand.
Well,
you want 1 minute, Mr. Dunn.
Noted, and I would argue that they need to change the word end date, because when I hear the word end date, I think it's the end, the veteran getting a payment for their benefit that they applied for. And as was alluded to in your report there, it said found in cases it did include the assessment step, the step determined the severity, including the impact. The end date also did not include the time it took for the veteran to receive that. That meant the veterans were waiting longer than the department had reported publicly. So I think, frankly, calling it an end date, perhaps call it that's when a decision was made on the benefit, but the actual end date of when, I would argue, successfully concluded is the veteran getting the actual compensation that they're entitled to. My last question is, why were the processing times for critical injury benefits not reviewed in this audit? Because are they not subject or assessed to the same officials that are reviewing VAC disability claims?
The critical injury, do you want to answer that one? If I may, Mr. Chair, I'll ask Mr. Swales to answer that one.
I'm afraid the answer is going to be short. So
yes, thank you.
Pardon me again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We didn't look at that because our focus was on the main disability benefit, which was the issue that had been brought to our attention by veterans groups in the past as being their primary concern. So that's where we looked in this work.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fragascatos, Mr. Fragascatos, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you to the Auditor General and your team there for your staff for coming today. I want to, Auditor General, read to you key recommendations, at least in my mind, key recommendations from various reports in the time that I'm allotted, and get your thoughts on implementation based on your expertise. The first report that I'll point to is Report 1, appropriately, Access to Benefits for Hard-to-Reach Populations. The recommendation that is especially highlighted is as follows, and I quote, "To better understand the effectiveness of outreach approaches, the Canada Revenue Agency and Employment and Social Development Canada should develop and implement consistent results-based performance measures for targeted outreach to hard-to-reach populations." My question for you is, what would these results-based performance measures look like exactly, and how, as important, how would they best be tailored to hard-to-reach populations? What would be some suggestions there? Zeroing in and delving into that question of hard-to-reach populations that the report focuses on.
So I'm going to attempt, and I might turn to Mr. Soils to add, but what we found was that the departments were measuring the number of activities. So, for example, they would go visit Indigenous communities in the hopes of in making individuals aware that if they filed their tax returns, they could receive the Canada Child Benefit. They measured the quantity of visits, but didn't actually measure whether or not those visits ended up in individuals filing a tax return and therefore then getting access to the Canada Child Benefit. That to me is not targeted to that group. There are many individuals on reserve, as we've seen from statistics, that are not accessing the Canada Child Benefit. And perhaps it is because they are unwilling or unable to file a tax return. So finding another way to ensure that an Indigenous family can access a benefit they are entitled to would be a targeted outreach activity. There are sometimes individuals who need help filling out a form. And so filling out the form might be the first step, but if they then also need to deal with a different department, they're on their own. So there isn't a sort of end-to-end service model that is focused on the individual and their barriers to trying to access these benefits. And that's why we encourage the government to think differently about how they try to reach hard-to-reach people that are not accessing the benefits on the traditional way that everyone else is.
And I suppose that's my question. How do you have advice? Do you have thoughts based on your expertise on how exactly this could move forward? Best practices, where it's worked internationally in other G7 countries, for example. Any thoughts there?
Some time for Nick to perhaps add to this. But I believe what we're not seeing is a focus on the actual barrier that needs to be addressed. We're really seeing the focus on having the hard-to-reach populations understand that this is the traditional access point to get these benefits, and let me help you get through that access point, instead of actually understanding the barrier. Nick, would you like to add something about other countries? Or?
Mr. Chair, if I could just add a couple of quick points. I think in terms of your initial question about measurement, a key issue from our perspective is disaggregation. It's getting down into the community levels and collecting information there on what the take-up rates are, and seeing whether the initiatives that they're undertaking are having an impact at that level, instead of just leaving it to the country as a whole, where the large numbers tend to obscure what's happening in those communities. There is a report that the British do. They produce a report on take-up rates every couple of years, which is based on some sophisticated ways of thinking about this problem. They do some modeling and they do some additional surveys. So there certainly is an example there that we think could be looked at more closely.
Certainly, there's always room for improvement. The Canada Child Benefit has been mentioned here. I think it would inform the committee. I think most members will know this already, but it's important to put it on the record that we have 300,000 plus children who have been lifted out of poverty because of that program, not to mention so many families right across the country that benefit each month. And the means-based approach is central to that. But as I say, we can always get your thoughts on how to do it better, and that's just one example.
Mr. Fagos-Gatos, I'm afraid that is
probably
your
at time.
time. Yes,
Okay, very good.
Well said. Turning now, encore, Madame Sinclair.
Again to Ms. Sinclair de Gagné. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to come back to my last questions. You talked about three very clear examples of the problems that you have cited: Veterans Affairs, preparation for a pandemic, and then the huge shortcomings in the CSC programs and how they affect racialized communities. So clearly, there are factors at play, such as systemic racism. Do you think that the government has a lot of progress to make over the next few months and years? I think that there are many barriers that Canadians face on a daily basis to have access to the programs and benefits that the government has created. So yes, there is a lot that needs to be done to identify the barriers and to find solutions to address them and reduce them. Because people find themselves on their own to deal with these barriers. We find that Indigenous people, for example, don't have the support to deal with industries and to deal with the barriers. So yes, thank you. We feel, and I'm saying this in this case, but clearly the federal government has a lot of room for improvement, even within its own institutions when it comes to systemic racism. We see figures here from the Auditor General's office. The government is against provincial legislation that's been adopted, but the federal government has a lot to do. Thank you.
You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to begin by addressing my Liberal colleague's comment on room to improve. I think this is far greater than that room, than the comment provides. Is I think a very serious situation that's provided the government is mounted. And this is really a situation where there's the whole house, not just one room, needs to be improved. Like, this is an extreme situation where our country's most disadvantaged, as you mentioned, are being left alone to deal with these kinds of violences by themselves, these kinds of barriers by themselves. And this has to be the core of what this committee and our work here provides, is the urgency to the government, how this must seize the government's attention, and immediately. We can't continue to disadvantage these groups for so long. It just, I don't want to have to sit here for another, decade and have to talk about the same thing like Ms. Hogan mentioned. Since 2009, some of these issues persisted. That's just not acceptable. And I think that comment diminishes in many ways the reality of this severity of this and the people who are being left behind. My riding is one of the largest in terms of its urban Indigenous population. And it's also plagued by a massive amount of poverty. And community members in my city have done extraordinary work to actually do this work on the ground level without the government. They've provided for themselves. They've tried their best to survive. They're literally selling bottles, doing what they can to feed themselves.
1 minute.
And this is the condition that we're seeing people in my community are suffering right now. Without community members supporting each other, we wouldn't have a community where I'm from. It's really because of each other it's happening. Your report says really clearly that there were outreach activities that ESDC conducted with Indigenous communities that were inadequate, and that was largely for rural communities. I just wanted to comment on how we can, given the fact that a majority of Indigenous people now live in urban centers, how are they being consulted, and did your report look at the condition of those populations as hard to reach?
In our report on hard-to-reach individuals, I don't believe that we disaggregated whether communities were rural or in a more populous area. We just looked at the group of Indigenous communities as a whole when we identified them and tried to disaggregate some data.
Thank you very much. That's all the time. Turning now again to our next round, Mr. Patzer, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair. I think I want to just kind of keep down this one path here, and that's talking about things like efficiencies, right? Like, you know, I think kind of a theme that could be part of this report is there's a lot of inefficiencies in government as well, right? Like, my colleague Eric was, his first round, he was talking about how there's more being spent but less service actually being delivered. Well, that's by definition inefficient, right? So I'm just wondering, do you when you're doing your audits, are you looking at ways and making recommendations that are specific to how the government can be more efficient without it having to be that, you know, we need to spend millions and billions of more dollars, but rather just focus on how we can be more efficient with the taxpayer's dollar? Just wondering if you wanted to elaborate on that.
Many of these reports you've categorized accurately. It's not necessarily about spending more. In some instances, there likely is a need to provide permanent funding to Veterans Affairs Canada so that they have a long-term stable workforce. You know, in the case of access to safe drinking water, likely again some more funding needed there. But in some instances, it is more funding. In other instances, you're right. It is about more efficiently or effectively spending that money. And I return to a statement I made earlier. It isn't about just the process. It is about the outcome. And that, to me, is a way to spend more effectively. We do try to look at that in some of our audits. Sometimes it's really hard to zone in as to why things aren't happening. And that's why in some instances we will talk about the ineffective or inefficient processes that are resulting in lack of outcome. But I believe one of the good ways to sort of target more effective processes would be to actually have a lot more disaggregated data to understand really truly the barriers that the groups you're trying to target are actually facing.
No, that's exactly right. And I think when you talk about hard-to-reach populations as well, right? I mean, you look at it from many different perspectives. We've touched on many of them here, right? I mean, serving a very large rural community, for example, I mean, that can sometimes be, and quite often is forgotten as one of the harder-to-reach areas just because of the fact, you know, the distance between places is so vast and becomes problematic. So I think, again, there's ways we can be more efficient in how government operates without it being more expensive, for sure. Just kind of building on that kind of point then. So when looking at how the government works with hard-to-reach populations, I think it's, you know, fair to say, yeah, I guess we kind of touched already on the different groups, but it's also the case that anyone in rural areas will generally have a harder time with accessing or navigating the services. I guess just, yeah, can you just elaborate more on what, you know, in the process for rural communities, you know, how that can be more efficient and have it better dealt with?
I'll start that off, and if I may, Madam Chair, I'll see if Mr. Searles would like to add to that. You know, I agree with you that a lot of the programs are accessed online before the pandemic, and the pandemic actually accelerated how so many more programs are accessed online. And so that does present a barrier for certain rural communities. I don't know, Mr. Swales, if you'd like to add something to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the part of the issue is, you know, that the government plays a role in reaching out, and we talk about that in a little bit in our report that some of the activities that they undertake have undertaken in Aboriginal communities more recently involve doing that kind of thing, taking a more proactive stance. So that could be part of a way of helping rural communities, more remote communities as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the service, like Service Canada, all these different outfits, like they quite often tend to be in your larger urban centers, which logistically makes more sense, right? But sometimes the participation is a bit of a problem or factor that reaching out. Not everybody's going to go looking through a Government of Canada website to try to find where the feedback link is on a program or how to make something better. So what more should be done, or do the audits reflect on what should be done on improving that outreach, I guess, to make sure that these disadvantaged communities are more adequately serviced?
I mean, that's a bit of a difficult question. I think that's something that the government needs to ponder on its own. There are so many different factors to consider, and we really just targeted in on 4 programs that were meant to help lift low-income families out of poverty and support them in their day-to-day lives. I mean, you can tackle any program, and there's likely a different need or a different response that might be needed. So I think it's about acknowledging that if you want to actually now touch the edges and the most vulnerable are those who really need the programs the most, recognizing that the traditional way is likely not going to reach them. So how do you change that traditional way to reach those that the program was also meant to support and might need it most?
And thank you very much. That concludes the round. Mr. Dong, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank the witnesses as well for coming today. As a new member to the committee this session, these reports are eye-openers, to say the least. To the Auditor General, I'm going to start off with a question on the hard to reach populations when it comes to government programs. You mentioned that there is one category of the population are newcomers, including refugees. And in your findings, did you see any collaboration between various ministries, whether it's CR8 or employment services, and did you see any collaboration of these ministries with IRCC through the settlement programs, so proactively the community organizations can go out and inform and assist these populations about the government benefits?
So, Mr. Chair, if you permit me, I will ask Mr. Swales to add in onto this issue. But I do think newcomers to Canada face many barriers, and oftentimes it's the language of the form or their hesitancy to interact with the government, depending on where they may be coming from. And so those are unique barriers as well that they face. And I will turn to Nick to comment on the collaboration and the program that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did speak with IRCC as part of the work, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, as part of our work. Certainly there is some collaboration, but that we thought was an area where what we're talking about sort of measuring and identifying the communities and getting better understanding of the take-up rates among them, that was one of the groupings that we thought was an opportunity for improvement. So certainly there is more work that could be done there.
Thank you. In my constituency work, I came across with a very sort of niche population who are waiting for the decision on their status, whether they're asylum seekers or previously undocumented workers. They're waiting for their status, but they have Canadian-born children, and these are Canadian kids. But because of the way the program is set up, they won't be able to access, say, Canada Child Benefit in that case. Do you think that there should be some modification or perhaps increased eligibility from I'm not talking about the policy side, but just want to get your thoughts on this. Should there be a way to kind of include these Canadian kids when it comes to this Canada Child Benefit?
Mr. Chair, honestly, that is a very large policy question as to who should be scoped into to programs. I'm not sure that I actually have a view or perspective on it. I do know that we actually issued a report on the Canada Child Benefit Program, and we found that once someone had submitted an application, the government was really effective at providing those payments to individuals. So now it's about identifying those people who aren't aware or incapable, who have different barriers to trying to access them. But your question is much more specific about a policy angle, which I'll defer to the policymakers to
Thank
comment
you.
on.
I look at the chart that you mentioned previously, showing. Sorry, I'm talking about the Veterans Affairs issue. Exhibit 2.1. You talk about the backlog numbers. In 2019, it's 40,305. 2020 is 49,216. And 2021, 227. And I see that these numbers has a lot to do with incomplete application that needs more information, because we saw the same amount of increase from 2020 to 2019, almost 10,000 there.
30 seconds,
So
Mr. Dong.
would you comment quickly on that? Is it because one of the largest contributor for the backlog, is it because somehow the ministry is not communicating well with the applicants and to get the information needed to process these applications?
The exhibit that you refer to, I think, really just identifies that there is an issue with the management of files at Veterans Affairs. So some of these files were waiting for applications, others were waiting to be assigned to an adjudicator, someone to actually start processing them. So it is, I think, a varied reason as to why items are sitting in the waiting or backlog file, and I'm not sure that I would attribute it more to one than another classification. I would boil it up to better file management needed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now go to Ms. Sinclair de Gagné for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to come back to one of the issues that has already been brought up, and that is your report on GBA Plus, so Gender-Based Analysis Plus. It seems that there is a lot of goodwill on the part of the government to improve the treatment of various groups, regardless of gender. But it seems that there has been little real improvement. Can you comment on that? With respect to GBA Plus, we noted shortcomings that existed already. There's a lack of capacity to actually do the analysis process and skills to do so. The second problem is a lack of availability or lack of use of the data. In some cases, the data is not available, and so then it's difficult to do the analysis. The third is the lack of focus on the outcome. So there's a lot of information on gender and how men and women have access to programs and their experience with that. But there is a lot of room for improvement with GBA Plus. For example, a woman with a disability, does she have access to a program or not? I think that there are 43 different aspects, and a lot of information is missing to be able to see whether concrete improvements are being made to reduce barriers. Is this a problem of lack of data or a problem with the processes? I think it is both to some extent. And I would add to a problem with what to do with the data. I think that Women and Gender Equality Canada needs to play a stronger role because they need to reinforce their action in educating people and the focus on programs. It's not just new programs, but existing programs. Thank you.
Back to you again for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to follow up in relation to the similar topic that I addressed in previous, just to remind it's access to services, particular to the hard-to-reach populations portion. And so there's many kinds of ways people can face barriers, of course. There's racial barriers, but there's also persons with disabilities, and sometimes both or multiple. They can also be there can also be gender inequities present in that as well. So considering that, I'm just thinking in my mind of community members in my city. We have 3,200 houseless folks, massive population that is just completely unserviced. And when I go talk to these folks, they often don't have ID. They don't have some of the basic things that these programs often demand in order to get support. And so in my thinking about how we can do better to service these populations, and I think of some of the models that have been employed by Indigenous Services Canada, for example, to go to hard-to-reach remote communities in person and say, here are some programs, albeit that's not very successful considering the mistrust between government and community members often, but that's an aside to my question. For those who may be experiencing very real barriers to access to these services, like persons with disabilities, is there a specific process that the departments, if any, take in order to better consult or to better inform those persons who may be living with a disability of these programs?
I believe that's one area that we highlighted in our report on hard-to-reach people, where there's a large opportunity for improvement. What we found is that a lot of the outreach actually didn't have that sort of hands-on, tailored approach for an individual who might be experiencing multiple barriers in order to access a program. I mean, you highlighted that there are, those who are housing insecure or those who are disabled. I would argue someone who might be living in a shelter, who is fleeing an abusive situation that may not have a permanent address, and then the inability to file a tax return and the inability to access some of the programs that they might absolutely need on a day-to-day basis. It goes back to that comment about needing to understand the barriers that these hard-to-reach populations are facing, and then how to break them down. The traditional route of file a tax return might not be what best serves them. I understand that these programs are mostly income-based that we looked at. So the Guaranteed Income Supplement program is actually piloting other ways to demonstrate income. Other than filing your income tax return. There are individuals who are hesitant to file them, not necessarily unwilling. Right?
Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan. Turning now to our final and last round, Mr. Abultaif, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Ms. Hogan, and to your team. I don't think you could be clearer over examining and highlighting the problems that we're facing. The government public sector have increased by, I think, 12% since 2015. We see a lack of outcome, less productivity, and that begs the question, are we too bureaucratic? Are we outdated? And do you think that we need a serious strategy to restructure the whole governmental sectors for the next 10 years, for example?
A very large question. I do believe, based on a lot of the work that we've seen, that at times the focus on process is much greater, or the machinery of government is much greater than the focus on outcomes. And that results in slow progress, in slow activity, slow action. I do caution the reverse, though, of eliminating all of it. We saw that with some of the pandemic relief programs, right? There needs to be a balance between the right amount of controls, the right amount of vetting, but also speeding up the process. But the focus, again, shouldn't just be on the process. And I think that's the key element, right? Adding value is looking at the outcomes for individuals and actually accessing the benefits, not necessarily just the activity to make you aware about the benefits. So I think it's about having the right focus, but also finding a better balance on the right level of controls and bureaucratic process, but to achieve the outcome.
Don't you agree that we need some kind of strategy in the next 5 or 10 years to even deal with the process? Because I agree. I hear from veterans, for example. I had 4 cases in my office, and they told me at the end, looks like the government is waiting for us to die before the applications get processed. And with that sentiment, I told the minister that I said to him, this is what I've been hearing from our veterans. And that in addition to other problems and social services with CRA, with IRCC, and every single department. I think the problem is not just in 1 or 2 departments. You've highlighted on a few things, but there's beyond that. I think this is a problem across the board. And I believe that maybe you are in a position to push for some kind of serious strategy, maybe restructuring of the whole governmental sector to be able to improve, because otherwise we are falling behind. And I do believe that sometimes we were ahead of the rest of the world, but now we seem to be falling behind.
I believe my role is to highlight for you areas that I see weaknesses and barriers, and then it is up to the policymakers to decide if a fundamental change is needed to the structure of the government. We all too often see siloed thinking, lack of sharing of information, and slow progress, focus on process. I've highlighted those over many years. I believe my office has highlighted those over decades. So it's how best now do we do differently? Right? And that's why I mentioned in my opening remarks that I was pleased to see an increased dialogue about gender and equality and diversity and inclusion. It is time now for actions to catch up with all of those words.
The government or the politicians can say and talk about this, but who has to do the job? Actually, the people that work in those different departments, and these people remain in the system. Doesn't matter how governments change. How do you believe, do the bureaucrats, if I may quote it that way, do they believe that we have a problem? Are they willing and open to talk about this and to really put solutions in place? Or, again, they're having the same fever that they're also falling behind on their own? How did you see that through your examination or throughout your research, if you wish?
So I'll be really honest with you. I believe there's an incredible desire and willingness in the public service to do right by Canadians and to improve outcomes. Absolutely. But there is a constant tension. It is a healthy tension, but there's a constant tension between the short-term nature of a government. Or a government turns over every 4 years, typically, or less. And that short-term focus sometimes takes away from that need to think long-term. And we see it, I believe, in some of the lack of activity. Spending on preparedness, stocking a national emergency stockpile for a potential issue down the road isn't a short-term issue. It's a long-term issue.
And thank you very much on that point.
You have to sort of...
Thank you all. Turning now to the Liberal bench, I believe it's Ms. Shanahan. Very good. Are you splitting your time, or is it your turn?
And I'll take the 5
Wonderful.
minutes, if
Thank
that's
you.
all right with my colleagues. Very good.
Very good.
Thank you so much, because, well, 2 things I just want to say off the bat. I share Ms. Hogan's assessment of the public service. I think that the goodwill and the desire to do better is definitely there, but it's part of all of our jobs to help that to happen. Et je veux juste partager aussi.
I also want to share that I was encouraged to hear the term systemic racism used today. It's very important, and we hear it quite rarely, unfortunately. I think that we have a recognition that systemic racism isn't a case of just saying something that isn't nice to somebody, but it is how our institutions, our processes, and so on are structured. And GBA Plus is a tool that can help identify it.
Looking at GBS, the report that is a follow-up on the gender-based analysis plus tool, and I'd like to get through you, Chair, Ms. Hogan's assessment on where we are with that tool, which has been evolving over I'd say at least 20, 25 years plus. Canada may have come a little later to the game, but how are we doing in relation to our peers, for example, in the OECD?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may ask Carrie Agnew to add some thoughts on this, but as you mentioned, the Government of Canada has made commitments that date back to 25 years on gender-based analysis, and more recently, gender-based analysis plus. I was disappointed to see that there wasn't more of concrete proof that all the activity has resulted in better outcomes across different intersectional lines.
But could I just break in there, if I may? Measurement is always an issue, but you do note in your report that progress has accelerated over the 5 years. So in terms of measurement, would things like for example, we had an initiative to increase the number of women in leadership positions, and we know that the number of women on boards, corporate boards, has increased approximately 2.5% each year since 2016. Is that an example of a measure that that's both efficient and effective? Or something like investments that we've made in gender-based violence. We do have statistics that show that the homicide rate has decreased by 33% in cases of gender-based violence, or pay equity and pay transparency, that indeed the pay gap has narrowed 3 cents since 2015, since we began that policy. I just want to have your feedback on measures like that. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, we're definitely looking for targets that are measurable and that are specific, and you need to monitor and measure progress over time. So at times we are seeing that. You do raise a few, but we're not seeing it across the board. Right, the completeness of it. There are, and as I said earlier on, when we talked about this tool, it is a mixed bag of results. And so when you sit back and try to get a global picture, that's not simple when the reporting is inconsistent, or when not everyone sets a measurable or specific target. If you'd like, we can talk perhaps about what other countries are doing. I could ask Carrie perhaps to add something, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back to the measurable and specific targets, they really do drive the achievement of gender equality and beyond. More so, it needs really to be the right type of data for the indicators to be able to monitor the intersectional impacts and the process. In our exhibit 3.4, disaggregated data is not available for those indicators, and there's no plan to change that yet. This is why we recommended that Women and Gender Equality Canada, in collaboration with others, develop more specific and more measurable targets for the gender results framework and for any other framework it contributes to, and that the development and implement of a plan to monitor these results really will improve the availability of data for the intersectional identity factors relevant to all the indicators in the related frameworks.
Very good.
Thank you.
And I look forward to studying that report, and better is always possible, Chair.
I'm afraid that's the time, because I want to squeeze everyone in here. So, Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, you have 2 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to talk about one of the issues that is not raised very often, and that is the treatment of seniors by our government. There's a lot of talk, but not a lot of results. Can you elaborate about the vulnerability of people who are seeking the GIS benefits? So the vulnerability of those people. That's a very specific question. I will see if Mr. Swales might like to respond. If I may, Mr. Chairman. I think that the comment that I would make in the context of our report is that, as our report says, when the government measures its success rate, where people are seeking this benefit, it really hinges on whether they have filed a CRA, a tax report. They should be looking at the whole situation, the whole population, not just those that have filed their tax return. Knowing that many people who apply for the GIS are already very vulnerable and face a lot of barriers, even just to complete an income tax return. What do you think about the idea of having people automatically receive the GIS, not having to apply for it, but if they have been identified as a vulnerable person who needs the help, then they would automatically get it? There are benefits for seniors that are automatic. So that's really a policy question. And people do have access issues.
Answer as well. Mr. Desjardins, you have, as was expected, I should say, it was because of Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank again the witnesses for being present. I know this is our final round, and we don't often have the pleasure of seeing all of you, so it means a lot that you're present today in what I think is really an important set of work. And I think the theme, if we could summarize it in some ways, Mr. Chair, is the overt systemic barriers that continue to plague our public service and continue to create irreparable harm to Canadians across the country, and particularly those who are the most vulnerable. I think on behalf of the folks who, of course, are watching this and all the people who are experiencing this, it's only fair. I believe that your reports have tabled recommendations that call on the government to do better in a whole swath of regions. And my only hope and my challenge in many ways is that we actually get this done. I mentioned in my previous statements how I believe it's overwhelmingly likely that the reports will be just put on a shelf somewhere, but I hope to be proven wrong on that, because that's the reality. That's just the truth of how these reports have been treated in the past. And I don't want to see that. I believe your office and your institution has an incredibly important role in our country, and when we do not heed the advice of your office, which is independent of our partisanship, it's important that we all listen and we take seriously how important those recommendations are, and don't defend the fact that we have these other data points like 3 cents, Ms. Shanahan, in all due respect. That's important, of course, but the reality is present to us that it's not working, it's not enough. And so we need to have stronger data points, we need to actually have follow-up, and we actually need to have accountability. That is what's important here to me, and I really thank you for being present. And I don't know how much more time I have, but I just want to relay, if there's any other comments that you want to make mention of, or any of your colleagues, I'd like to yield my time to you or your colleagues.
30 seconds.
I thank you for giving me time. I agree. I think this group of reports is really not just about programs that are meant to target the mass part of the population, but it's the entire population. And I hope that they highlight barriers that need to be addressed by the government, so that no one is left behind by the government.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and appearing before us again today. It was good to see you the other day as well to get a preview of your office's work. We appreciate it. I'm going to suspend the meeting now, excuse the witnesses and any guests that are in the room so we can turn to our committee business very quickly as well. Thank you again for appearing.
Thank you.